All right, everybody. I'm talking to Eliza Orlins. She's running for Manhattan District Attorney. Thank you for doing the show. Very much appreciate you being here. How are you doing today?
Good, good. Great to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And we actually became aware of you through Ginger Banks, who is an adult star, who is mutual you're friends with. And it's because you are a pro sex work candidate for Manhattan DA, which is a huge change from what you'll normally see. And there's been talk in New York State of decriminalization of prostitution and sex work in New York, and I'm just curious how you would act on that in Manhattan.
Well, so the problem is when people use the word decriminalization, I
Hmm.
think right now it's being weaponized by folks who are really not in favor of decriminalization. These are people who are really advocating for what is still a prohibitionist model, what they call the Nordic model, the Swedish model, the
Hmm.
equality model, but it still is prohibition. And so I've connected with Ginger and with tons of other sex workers because I've kind of looked to them to guide me through figuring out how to release this policy, which is, I'm proud to say, the most detailed policy on decriminalization of sex work of any candidate in the United States right now. So that's it's something that I've always spoken out about. I've been like a proud ally to sex workers, to the sex work community. And I think that the only way to end the stigmatization, the marginalization, the continued over policing and over prosecution of those communities is by the full decriminalization of consensual sex work.
Now, when you say full decriminalization, you mean legalization, essentially.
So I don't. Those are like kind of two separate things.
Mm.
Legalization would still mean that prosecutors could prosecute people who maybe didn't have the proper licensing, didn't have the proper,
Mm.
business zoning, this, that, the other. Legalization puts other barriers to entry and still gives prosecutors and police power to continue to prosecute people for doing their job.
Hmm.
It excludes people who are maybe non-citizens. It excludes people, who are undocumented. So decriminalization is just the ending of prosecution of people who are engaging in consensual sex work. But I think there's a great example. Like somebody said, well, the people who are Nordic model advocates, who are still advocating for this prohibitionist model, um, are the ones who are saying, well, we're not going to prosecute the people who are selling sex, but the buyers we're going to continue to prosecute,
Hmm.
as though that really makes a difference in the way in which people are able to do their jobs. In fact, it actually makes people who are engaging in sex work less safe. It doesn't enable them to vet their customers. It doesn't enable
Hmm.
them to be protected from police violence, because if police are still pursuing their customers,
Hmm.
then of course they're still going to be in danger of being targeted by the police. So, criminalizing sex work has made everyone less safe for many years. And I think that just like other prohibitionist models that we've seen with, with alcohol, with marijuana, with other drugs, it's not working. And, I think that the criminalization doesn't prevent the behavior. And then meanwhile, it creates black markets. It puts people in jeopardy and in danger, and also prevents them from getting medical care or reporting
Hmm.
abuse or violence against them. So I mean, it's pretty clear when you actually sit down and talk to sex workers that the only just policy is full decriminalization of consensual sex work.
Okay. And now that model that you're talking about, I remember when that started in Sweden. I had a friend. She lived, and they were touting it as kind of a progressive policy where they were just going after Johns and not the women participating in it. But I would imagine now you've reduced the pool of customers to those willing to commit crimes, which is probably a little bit of a more dangerous situation.
Well, and also it means that the person who is purchasing sex work, you can't vet them. They're going to be much more um,
They're going to be
reticent
reserved.
to right. They're not going to want to provide their name. They're not going
Hmm.
to want to provide references. Like, these are people who then are going to have to worry about criminal prosecution.
Hmm. Okay, but like, so a big. This is something I was curious about, because I'm always for the more freedom. If two people, consenting adults, want to do anything they want, I'm fine with it as long as they're not hurting a third party. But The number one criticism of sex work tends to be nowadays human trafficking and things like that. Is there a way to still crack down on that with a decriminalization policy like the one you're talking about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I actually think that, people can check out my platform on my website. It's elizaorlins.com. But we are really clear to draw a distinction between sex work and sex trafficking. And my decriminalization, declining to prosecute people engaging in consensual sex work does not mean that I will not aggressively prosecute sex traffickers. Sex trafficking means that somebody is I've brought into this work through force, fraud, coercion, and that is distinct from sex work, which is, sexual activity between consenting adults without any force, fraud, or coercion. And so, it's something that is incredibly important to talk about, because human trafficking, because, people talk a lot about sex trafficking and fearmonger with regards to it, but human trafficking occurs in all sorts of industries, in labor, et cetera. And human trafficking is something that we will aggressively go after. But I think the conflation of the two is really, just a way in which people try to continue to stigmatize sex work.
I would think it would make it easier for women to come forward, victims of trafficking who are trafficked for sex work, if they aren't fearful of prosecution, right? If there's no way to prosecute them, then they could testify against essentially these abusers that put them in the situation.
Exactly. So exactly. So when someone is being trafficked, the fear of coming forward when they're afraid of their own prosecution, maybe they're afraid of deportation, maybe they're afraid of other things, with this criminalization, it really does push this industry further underground. It makes people who are afraid of arrest, not be able to come forward. And I think it makes it so dangerous for everyone involved. And I think the thing that we should be doing is prosecuting traffickers. But I also think it's important to draw a distinction between actual trafficking and what sometimes gets lumped in as trafficking, which is just, helping out someone else who is your colleague at work, allowing someone to share your home or giving someone a ride to work. Those things which can fall under the criminal statutes of trafficking
really
are not trafficking, not in any meaningful way. If you think about, heroes in the movement like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, they created Star House, they protected young trans women and sex workers. And under the law right now, they could be arrested and prosecuted for trafficking just for showing kindness and keeping people safe.
For providing room and board?
Yep.
Really?
For working together, for providing, yep.
How does that work? Just because they're providing the house or they're moving people around or whatever, giving somebody a ride would count as trafficking?
Exactly. So, we should be focusing on prosecutions of actual human traffickers, of people who are doing things, who are forcing or coercing someone against their will to do something they don't want to do, not people who are trying to survive and trying to keep one another safe.
Okay. And you have a policy on your website, again, elizaorlins.com, that you want to do a similar thing for drug possession, correct? A complete decriminalization of all drugs. And again, not a legalization thing, just a pure decriminalization.
Yeah, well, that is something that, I'm hopeful that we will head towards a, full decriminalization of all drugs, and, legalization one day, because, the war on drugs has been an abject failure, has been nothing more than a war on people, has really over prosecuted, over incarcerated Black and brown people, specifically lower income people who are LGBTQIA, people with disabilities, and has really just led to mass incarceration in this country. And so, ideally, we will get towards full legalization of all drugs. But for the meantime, cannabis should be fully legal, and we should be reinvesting in communities that have been most hurt by the war on drugs. And we should be decriminalizing all drugs. I will not prosecute drug possession.
of any form or well, I think well, so I kind of agree with you that we need to get to full narcotic. I mean, I completely agree with you that we need to get to full narcotic legalization. It's a weird thing because we just whatever. I had an issue with the current president because I talked about it on the show a few weeks back. Whereas like when I was a kid, my mom was addicted to drugs. She had a severe addiction, and I remember the moment that hugs not drugs went out the fucking window when I realized that it was the stigmatization of drug use that was keeping her lying. And I remember being a child and knowing when I changed my opinion on that. And I honestly think the president of the United States who wrote the laws that hurt these people should have to sit down and explain to us when what was his moment where he changed his mind because he said he's changed his mind. And that's where the conversation has to come from, is from higher up leadership. And I love hearing it from any politician saying this because, again, it directly affected my life. I grew up in New York City, and it completely affected who I am as a person. And I need anybody who's flip-flopping on this in any way, shape, or form. I want them to be, especially if they were aggressive about it in the past, I want to hear from them what changed their mind because if they've actually changed their mind, it's going to be a horrific story. And I'm curious, like, have you always had these viewpoints? And if not, what changed your mind on them?
That's a great question. I don't remember I mean, I guess I remember in elementary school, just say no campaigns and trying to convince children not to engage with drugs. But it wasn't really until I think started probably college when when I was a teenager and I interned at, the public defender's office in Manhattan where I ended up, where I've spent my entire career working now. And I saw the way in which people were treated who were suffering from substance use disorder or who were dealing with an addiction issue. And they were just dragged into the courthouse, in handcuffs. They were unwell. They looked, they were obviously struggling. And then they were charged with crimes. They were put in jail. They were forced to plead guilty. They were dealing with withdrawal. They were dealing with other things. And they were given no help. No one cared. And it was just like absolutely mind-blowing. And I was like, how could this be the way in which we handle people who are dealing with a substance use disorder? Like, why is that in any way okay? And I think I felt the same way about people who were dragged in, who were engaging in sex work. And I, sat there across from people who were dealing with, these issues or who were working or who were dealing with mental health issues. And I watched the way the system treated them and just cycled them through and locked them up in a way that didn't address any of the underlying issues, B, didn't keep us safe, C, upended their lives in ways that like you couldn't imagine. People would lose their jobs, lose their homes, lose their children to foster care. And for what? Like, this system of incarceration is not helping anyone. So, I think I've known this for a long time. I've been speaking out about these issues long before it was popular. I looked back and like the first time I was talking about these issues, of legalization was, I think I was tweeting about it in 2010, which like to say it was like not a popular opinion in 2010 was like, would be an understatement. And I'm really glad that now so many people have come around to being like, wow, we should be dealing with, substance use disorder as the public health issue it is. Or we should be, decriminalizing sex work and allowing people to do their job. I mean, like people are like parroting my phrase, people are saying in my race, even who are running against me, who've never cared about these issues, never been in the streets marching and fighting for the decriminalization of sex work, who are now like, sex work is work. And it's like, great. I'm so glad if you really came around.
Yeah, I mean, it's called a blowjob. It's work. We all have known that forever. We have all always known that it's work. I mean, come on now. I mean, look, I've been in a strip club. I've seen very fat men in there. It is certainly work. they have an odor.
Like, well, but the people who say, oh, well, that can't be work because, the people take this like paternalistic view and they're like, well, you can't possibly be choosing to engage in that work. And it's like, yes, people are. Yeah. And have you ever sat down and talked to anyone, and maybe they'd rather be doing that than picking up feces in a bathroom, but we don't say that people who clean bathrooms are not engaging in real work because
Hmm.
it somehow does something that they don't like, that you don't think it's, it's like this
Yeah.
really, really weird thing that we've like stigmatized and criminalized, like these behaviors that people in society are like, oh, I don't like this thing.
What's an interesting thing with the sex work thing, because I've been thinking about it a lot, just like almost from like, it's almost funny how like I feel like so much of the stigmatization of sex work went out the window when COVID happened and half the country started OnlyFans accounts. Like, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering, like, is that something that you think can really move this forward? Just the fact that, like, I mean, we talked about it on the show a few weeks back. There was an EMT, and
Yep.
if you know
I
about
was going to
EMTs in New
say
York,
that
I'm
was,
sure you know how criminally underpaid EMTs are, especially for private companies. And yeah, she got the Post dragged her. I forget the girl's
I mean, the
name.
New York Post. Yep. We don't even need to bring up her name because
Hmm.
she should be able to do her job in
Hmm.
private, and like, her life was upended when the New
Hmm.
York Post attacked her. They've actually attacked me twice in the last week, but I take it as a compliment because if the New York Post is against me, that means I'm doing something right. um but the that was, I tweeted about it when that came up, and AOC even tweeted about it, and I think that there are a lot of things that have really brought the, sex work decriminalization movement and the destigmatization of it, to the national stage, to the forefront, and releasing this policy, that so many sex workers and sex work allies and advocates have like helped us on, really was this such a clarifying moment because we got such overwhelmingly positive support. Like,
Hmm.
so many people just said how excited they were to see this, and the response was so fantastic. Of course, there are the people who are awful and don't respond well, but like, really, it was such overwhelming support. And it really makes me very hopeful about what the future holds.
Do you worry at all about, at a time when you're talking about not legalizing, but especially decriminalizing and not regulating sex work, at a time when we're literally not supposed to touch each other? Is that an additional hurdle, or are people just more open to? Has it hurt the movement at all, or is it just opened up because people are sitting at home and can actually contemplate these issues now?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think at the heart of it, it's kind of saying, well, will if sex work is decriminalized in Manhattan, if
Hmm.
when you become district attorney and people, it's you say you're not going to prosecute it, will it increase the number of people who are engaging in it? And the truth is, like, when you look at all of the places where they've actually enacted full decriminalization, places like New Zealand, and other places, there were they have years of data now because
Hmm.
they did this, long ago. We're lagging behind here, but
Hmm.
they have analyzed that data, and it turns out that, the sex industry has not increased in size, and, all of these things that people were fear mongering about beforehand, really have not come to fruition. And so, like, there's really no suggest like all these suggestions that like it will create some boom in the industry is like,
Hmm.
it's a little misplaced, and it's really just fear mongering to try to continue
Well, what are
to,
some of the
you know,
other, well, besides obviously growth of the industry, like what are some of the things that people are afraid of? Because I'm sure they're framing this. Oftentimes, they're framing anything that's anti-sex work as a protection of the girls working. And is that a lot of what it is? Are they worried that like the mistreatment of the women partaking in the work would be mistreated, or are they worried about, the old school 1950s, if we legalize prostitution, our young men will stop being productive situation? Will it erode the family kind of nonsense?
to be honest, you'd have to ask them. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't understand it because for me, like, I fundamentally disagree with that position.
Hmm.
And, you know, I think we know from all of the data that's out there that anything besides full decriminalization, like this Nordic model, like, oh, we're here to protect you, you women, it increases violence, it increases police coercion, it creates underground markets, it leads to violence. It's just, I mean, first of all, even right now, like under like full criminalization of sex work and partial criminalization under Nordic model would still, like, it's never discouraged people from engaging in it, nor
Hmm.
will it ever.
Hmm.
And we need to just stop criminalizing the choices people are making with their own bodies. and focus on public health, focus on fighting actual people who are engaging in trafficking. And, I think like it's so important that these advocates have been on the ground doing this work for years and years to like have gotten us to this place where someone like me can come in with a national platform and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And this is how we're going to build a safer, healthier, more equitable New York, and have it be this thing that people are really paying attention to and that people agree with and are excited about.
Well, one thing that you're talking about that I think is great is I don't quite understand it, but just the idea of a conviction review board, whereas even after somebody's been convicted of something, there's going to be a chance to have those overturned more easily. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that. And just in general, what you think about, I think we need to stop sealing records for just juveniles. I think if you've got enough time after a conviction, I think that's a massive disservice we do in this country to we've got the most people locked up, and then we're just like, yeah, can you believe the recidivism rate? Like, yeah, now they can't get jobs, asshole. The internet exists. Like,
exactly.
So it's like, would your review board add to that as well, or is it obviously if you have the conviction overturned, it's overturned? It won't come up in a background check or anything like that, would it?
Right, exactly. But also, one of the things on our policy is that we want to vacate all convictions for all of the things that we are no longer going to prosecute.
Mm-hmm.
So things like if you have a prior conviction for sex work, that should be vacated. If you have a prior conviction for drug possession, that should be vacated, because these are all things I'm not going to prosecute, along with dozens and dozens of other misdemeanors, low-level felonies. Like, these are things that should not be on your record. And we should have a sealing statute. We should have that. But I also think, far too often the criminal legal system does get it wrong. And that's unacceptable. And I think that, yes, like wrongful convictions often, units often focus on exonerations, which are obviously, of paramount importance, but also we should be reviewing and undertaking, like having a look back at and trying to protect against anything that is, an undue or unlawful sentence, or something that's, shouldn't have been a conviction or shouldn't have been a prosecution in the first place. And so I think like a lot of these conviction review units that exist right now, like look back at cases where the damage was done decades ago, or, it's like years and years ago. And so the damage has already been done, and they're like basically these cold case units. Whereas, what I am proposing, what I want to do when I get into office, is have a unit that is, in fact, reviewing cases as they are going on. And it's a fully independent unit, separate from the rest of the DA's office. And it would really be kind of groundbreaking in that way, because they could step in at any time, any point throughout the case, and basically say, okay, this is a case where we need to step in because justice is not being effectuated here. And so they would have the authority to do that. And then they'd also be doing like a qualitative and quantitative analysis in the moment, like really doing data analysis and making sure that cases are not deviating, like where there's some outlier, so they could release that data, be fully transparent, and make sure that we are not, enforcing the law unjustly, unfairly, unequally.
Well, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like when you say the unequally or unfairly, like, so they would take real-time data points to a case that's currently underway? Because there's always a lot of people who are listening to this who don't know who I have. I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, clearly been arrested in the city of New York many times. But a lot of people don't realize this. You go to court about 8 times before they ever tell you what is going to happen.
If you're lucky.
Yeah. And they just keep bringing you back. So at any given time in there, so essentially what happens is you have a person who keeps missing days of work, and then they're basically like, plead guilty and we'll let you go. So is that a kind of thing where you would have this unit and they would kind of come in and be like, well, this guy just pled innocent and now you're fucking ruining his life because
Right.
he's fighting a thing that he didn't do or potentially didn't do. And because basically administrative, like bureaucracy kind of holds people up, and it forces people to plead guilty when they shouldn't, when they don't believe they should.
100%. 100%. And it's like, I call it the criminal punishment bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like criminal justice system, you'll never hear me like justice for who?
Yeah. Well, that's a fair
punishment
point.
Bureaucracy.
We don't live in a rehabilitative state. I was talking about this when they reversed they made it illegal for-profit prisons federally. I was like, just the fact that it's a debate on for-profit prisons just is society acknowledging that we're locking up most people on some bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like the fact if we were just locking up the worst people that we were all terrified of, we'd probably be like, whatever, for profit. Like, nobody would care. It's just we are all aware as citizens of the United States that more, like, the vast majority of people who are in prison are there for some bullshit.
But I'd be remiss not to point out that private prisons are, the very lowest of the low-hanging fruit. And, it doesn't actually, there's still tons of people profiting off of the incarceration and caging of mostly people of color in this country. Like, there's still a prison industrial complex where they're making billions of dollars off of the caging of humans, and for-profit federal prisons, which doesn't even include the immigration detention, et cetera, that Biden did. It's a great start, but like, let's not overstate what actually needs to happen, which is a full dismantling of this criminal punishment bureaucracy.
I absolutely agree with you. There was a meme that was going around when California passed recreational marijuana finally, which I thought was they put a lot of people out of business that they shouldn't have, because it was just a way to get big money into marijuana in California. But that's a whole other thing. But there was this meme going around that said, and it very blatantly said that for-profit prisons were the second highest contributor to anti-marijuana recreational laws. And I would just go, do you know who the number one contributor was? And everybody goes, no. And I go, it was the Corrections Union of California was the number one. Let's not sit here and go, it's only this. There's a whole bunch of people who are like very invested in continuing to lock people up.
Absolutely.
So
the status quo is,
that's
there are a lot of people who want to maintain the status quo, and that's why having someone like me running, and I'm running against the establishment, and there are a lot of people who are very afraid of that, and they're going to be, out there attacking me in any way they can. I told you I've been attacked twice by the New York Post in the last 7 days. Like,
what if they
just little old me, like, saying basically that my policies of declining to prosecute low level offenses are going to create. It's just the typical fear mongering. Eliza wants to do this as murder rates are rising. Eliza wants to let people out of jail. It's like there's no congruence there. Like, their arguments make no sense. But the fact that they're fear mongering about me means like they're deeply invested in someone like me not getting elected.
Well, the New York Post, to be fair, they'd probably sell more papers if you did. You know what I mean? These are the people who put it's front page news when a squeegee man is by the tunnel. You know what I mean? Like, every time.
Right.
What I wanted to talk about is with the review board. So obviously there's going to be an issue initially because prosecutors are going to have their cases overturned, and that's going to be a pushback. But does the threat of that, just the threat of that existing, should in turn stem the tide of malicious prosecutions for no reason, right?
Well, it's not just the threat of that, because I don't know, because since that has never existed, we don't know whether or not that would actually have an impact, like having that as a deterrent impact. But it's that in combination with all the policies that I will be, enacting as district attorney, and saying, hey, here are the things that our office is no longer going to do. We're no longer going to prosecute, sex work, decriminal, drug cases, low-level misdemeanors, low-level felonies, these like predatory, targeted, police-initiated crimes, the buy and busts and the Operation Lucky Bag. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that?
No, I don't know what that is. I know what a buy and bust is, but I don't know Operation Lucky Bag in particular.
So for anyone who doesn't know, a buy and bust is like basically they send an undercover police officer in, and usually they prey on people who are themselves suffering from addiction issues or substance use disorder, and they send an undercover in pretending to basically be dope sick or pretending to be, and with fake crusted vomit, and they're like, hey man, please help me out, like I need some. And people are like, I don't sell, man. No, like, leave me alone. And he's like, please, you've been here, and like prey on their emotions, prey on their, whatever. They hand over one pill of their own Xanax, one little part of their own stash, some of their own methadone. And then before they know it, boom, an entire narcotics team descends on them, arrests them for a felony sale to an undercover police officer. Okay. And now they're facing years in state prison for that conduct. So it's absolutely inhumane. It's wrong. Those cases should not exist. And I've, represented far too many people who've been targeted by the police in that way, and I will not prosecute those cases. For Operation Lucky Bag, it's what the police have dubbed it. Operation Lucky Bag is they basically set people up. They'll set up like a bag. That's why they call it Lucky Bag. On a bench in the subway station,
Oh,
with
I
like
do
an
know what you're
iPad
talking about.
sticking
Yeah.
out of it, with $100 bill sticking out of it, and someone will go over and maybe they open it and they're like, "Oh, this has no ID." They'll look around. Is this anybody's? Nobody says anything. They're like, "Cool. Well, I found a bag with $100 in it, or I found a bag with an iPad in it," and they go to walk away, and then boom, arrested for stealing.
Now, how did they get this is something I was in central bookings once with a guy, and I did believe him, even though it was a crazy far-fetched story. And I'm curious if this ever happens. He had just gotten out of prison, and he goes, "I'm going back, man." He just starts talking to me, and he goes, "I was walking on the beach." He's like, "First of all, they filled up the boardwalk," and he's from Coney Island. He's like, "They filled up the boardwalk, man. It's like Baywatch out there with the ATVs." He's like, "I'm walking, and I just see a bag." And he goes, "I look down and it's just filled with crack vials." And I was like, "You found a bag filled with crack vials on the beach?" I was like, "It's not unheard of in Coney Island." And like, he goes, "Yeah, I figure I'll just give that to my cousin. It's a quick couple bucks." He's like, "As soon as I hit the boardwalk, they lock me up." I was like, is that a thing that they're doing? They're leaving large quantities of drugs out to arrest people?
I wouldn't put it past them.
So
Wouldn't put it past them.
I remember the thing in the subway. It got a lot of attention. They're not allowed to do that anymore, correct?
So theoretically, they're not doing Lucky Bag anymore, but they're still doing it. They're doing it with bicycles. They'll leave like a bicycle unchained on the sidewalk, and someone will come up and be like, "Oh my God, there's just a bike sitting here. It's like not locked up," and they'll take it, and they're like, "Well, you knew that wasn't your bike," and they'll charge them with stealing the bike. They'll do it with other stuff. Like, it's still happening. And these are like, it's truly predatory the way that they do it, and it's just something that I will not prosecute. But I think that's something where they'll use these types of things to fearmonger and say that I'm a person who is going to, allow the city to become crime ridden or whatever they're going to say. But it's just, it's such a deep misunderstanding of, what is actually happening. Like, we're sold this like false choice between public safety and incarceration, or public safety and like a punitive legal system. And the truth is that locking people up is not keeping us safe. And it's just like, people think that we're going to like be able to incarcerate our way out of these public health problems or out of these issues that people are having, and it's just not true. And I think there are a lot of people invested in maintaining the status quo, but I'm really fighting to upend it, because I think that there's such better ways of doing things. If we do things to address someone's substance use disorder, someone's mental health issue, or poverty, or, so many other things, so many other ways of addressing things. And meanwhile, allowing people to remain in their homes, allowing them to remain with their families, to go to their jobs, to put food on the table, and not just like cycling them through a system that subjects them to, violence and trauma anyhow, then in fact, crime rates go down. Like, that's what we see across the board. And so it's just, I think it's just misplaced fear mongering, like frequently. But I think, we're still fighting to overcome that because of this system that we've been sold for so long.
But the largest experiment has been Portugal, right? And they saw a decrease in violent crime across the board once they decriminalized drugs, right?
Exactly.
And I can't imagine we wouldn't see that in New York. And just in general, it seems to me that like one of the biggest problems New York has right now is just an overwhelming number of stops of young men by the police, which consistently leads to problems and PR problems for the same police. If we just eliminate the reasoning for those stops, then like very few people who are on, I mean, like it's crazy to think that street crime is down because of aggressive policing at a time where like, for the most part, the city is just more prosperous financially. But on top of that, there's no money in mugging someone anymore. No one carries money. What are we doing? Like, it's like, Like it's just a bizarre thought. But I want to talk to you about you mentioned the national platform. I didn't want to talk about it up top, but it is you have a celebrity because I don't watch Survivor, but you were on 2 seasons of Survivor, right?
That is true. That's true.
I did watch the clip about the fucking stick earlier this morning because I had to look it up. But do you worry in New York politics? There's always this thing. I remember I watched 1776. You know the musical. I watched that with my grandmother when I was a kid, and there's the whole thing about the New York State Assembly and how just a mess New York politics was even then. And do you worry about? I saw what happened with Cynthia Nixon. Just the way there's like jaded New Yorkers when you have that. Like, do you find it to be a plus or a minus? In which ways? The added celebrity of being on these shows, it gives you a national platform. It gives you, you have more of a voice in the beginning, but does it make you kind of an easy target for mudslinging?
I think that I went on reality television when I was 21 years old. I went on a competition show. It's certainly not who I am as a person, but I mean, I've spent far more time, in the courtroom in front of judges, arguing on behalf of clients, fighting against injustice than I ever have in front of a camera. But it has enabled me to have a national platform. And I've always used it to speak out against injustice, to advocate for reform, to fight, back against these, these forces that want to really perpetuate these horrific systems. And so I think that if anything, it's, and it's an interesting kind of hook. And then we get people in to pay attention to what I'm actually saying. And then they're like, oh, wow. Oh my gosh. Like, because my experience really speaks for itself. Like the fact that I've spent my entire career as a public defender, represented thousands of people charged with crimes, really been up close and personal in the trenches, fighting every day of my career. Like that's what matters, and that's, if the fact that I was on, Survivor in 2004, like gets people to look, to give our campaign a second look. Like I'm glad for that.
Well, because you did that while you were in college, right?
Yeah.
So if anything, that should, like, you did the Survivor, and then the next year you graduated. I looked at, and it was just like, if anything, that should add, like, if you can do that and graduate college in the same year, it probably shows that you can multitask. At the very least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, the thing that I say, the way that it prepared me for politics is I've had people writing nasty things about me on the internet for, over a decade and a half. And so now all the people attacking me, I'm like, bring it on. I'm ready. I can handle it.
The Post has nothing against some Survivor message board from 15 years ago.
No kidding.
Yeah. I know. I've had it too. Believe me. We all get stuff on the internet. My producer's nodding in the other room because people say things about him. He's never on camera. Like it's gonna happen.
Exactly.
Here's I know, I don't want to take up too much of your day, but ElizaOrlins.com, at Eliza Orlins on Twitter. Now, I want to tell you, I actually am an elected official in New York. I'm a county committeeman for Kings County.
Amazing.
For about 6 months, I still don't know what we're supposed to do. I sat through 2 13-hour Zoom meetings. I don't know if you've seen any of that online. Do you know what a county committeeman does? Because nobody can tell me. Nobody's told me.
So somebody was actually saying, they were like, Eliza, you should run for county committee. And I was like, well, I'm kind of already running for something, like I'm a little busy.
It's a way bigger deal.
But the county committee especially in Manhattan could end up, if some of these elections go through, could end up being the deciding factor on who replaces some of these sitting elected officials who are running for other positions. So that's kind of a big deal. Like it's not like they would have, if you're within 1 year of your election, they don't do a special election, and instead they have county committee make that decision. So county committee could end up playing a huge role in New York City electoral politics in the next 6-8 months, whatever it is.
Oh, okay. Look, we finally found out, Frank. We finally found out what I'm supposed to, I don't know if did you see any of the news about what actually happened in the Kings County committee meeting? They had to bring in a professional parliamentarian.
I heard it was absolutely wild.
Went to my high school, Brooklyn Tech. Rob Robinson was the guy's name. They're calling him a white supremacist in the Zoom chat. And then all
Oh
of a
my
sudden
God.
he turns the camera on, and this was like, looked like he could easily be standing next to Malcolm X in the 60s guy. And I was just like, oh my God, this is hilarious. It was
Oh my God.
insane what was happening in this meeting. That's why I literally
Oh
was like,
my
I was
God.
excited. I was like, I'm going to learn some stuff. This is going to be great. And then it was just people calling a black man a white supremacist. And I was like, what is going on? And I like asked the
Oh my
lady who got me into
God.
it. I was like, why are they doing this? She was like, I don't know. I don't know. So I don't envy you doing something way harder in New York
Oh
politics.
my gosh. Well, listen, yeah, Kings County's got its own issues, but
Yeah.
thankfully we're over here in New York County. It's
It's a
maybe
little more,
maybe
it's a
slightly different.
little more subdued. Do you think you have an easier time? It's a weird thing. So Manhattan is large. I mean, in Manhattan right now, but it is kind of weirdly cleared out of a lot of people. Like, is that a benefit or a hurdle if you're running an election? The fact that just the population seems to be down right now.
Um, it's, it could be either. We expect that turnout for the June primary will be potentially high because we're going to be deciding the next mayor, the next
Mm-hmm.
borough president, the next district attorney. There are, 35 of the 51 city council seats up for election. There's so many people on the ballot. And so I think that people will be engaged and turn out. But again, as you say, there are people who may not be in the city. We just need to find and identify and turn out our voters no matter where they are. So
Mm.
it's not necessarily good or bad. It just could change the way in which the race turns out, because
It se- it
it
seems
could
like
be a
a
small
benefit for
number
you,
of
no?
votes.
Well, it could be, but it
Yeah,
seems
I
like a
mean,
benefit for you because your platform, the people who left aren't from here, right? We can all, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's
right.
like, but so it's like your platform is for the people who grew up here, who want to see that sort of change. These communities who are kind of like affected by gentrification because all this aggressive policing and stuff like this. I mean, I saw it ramp up when I was in my early 20s.
Right.
Just as a, people talk about the stop. I was stopping for so many times when I was,
Yeah.
19 to 22. And it's just like, you think it's not like a big deal, but it's like at the same time, it's like people are just walking by and there's cops with you against a wall. It's like, even if you haven't done anything, if that guy knows your dad, he's gonna be like, hey, I saw your son getting searched by the police. It's
Right.
always, it's kind of a weird dehumanizing issue. But it's like, so
Of
like,
course.
but these policies are for the native New Yorkers, and
Exactly.
you're born and raised in New York, yeah,
Born and raised.
yeah.
Yep. Grew
So
up in Manhattan.
that's what I'm saying is like, so it's like, if that's who you're speaking to, it seems like it could be an advantage, no?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we're seeing is that like our message is resonating with people who live in Manhattan, with people who are here, with people who've stuck it out, with people who care deeply about this city. And this is where I'm from and where I'll be forever. Like this is, it's New York or nowhere for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like it really does. It's the New Yorkers care about these things, and they're going to stick around, and they're going to turn out. They're going to show up and vote for us on June 22nd.
June 22nd is when the vote is. ElizaOrlins.com for the entire platform. I think everybody should at Eliza Orlins. Is there anything else you need to get out there?
The crazy thing about our race is that the maximum donation, this is another way in which they really want to maintain the status quo. The maximum donation per individual donor in our race is over $35,000 per person.
Mm.
Like if you'd wanted to give to Joe Biden in the primary, you could give him $2,800. This is more than 10 times that.
Wow.
So there are, millionaires, billionaires, Trump donors, like people, cruise donors who are giving to my opponents, who are trying to keep someone in the Manhattan DA's office who's not going to bring the kind of radical change that I'm looking to bring. And meanwhile, we are doing this on, like, we're running the only grassroots campaign for Manhattan District Attorney. Like, we've got people who are monthly donors of $1, who've given
Mm.
$5, $25, $50. We have more donations by thousands and thousands than anyone else in the race. We have over 7,300 individual donations. Like, we're doing this with we're the people powered campaign. And so if you're able, and you can go to the website, ElizaOrlins.com, and donate, that would be amazing. We would be so grateful, because we need to have all the people on our side, because we're going up against the establishment.
Okay. Well, then obviously give it a help. I mean, look, you got good people on your side. Ginger Banks is good people as far as I'm concerned.
Truly.
Always. She's been here in this studio with us multiple times. I want to ask you one last thing. I am putting together a board of directors. I would like to apply to get a dispensary license at some point. It's all black entrepreneurs in New York and me. Would you back me up if you become DA?
I don't know that I have that power, but sure, of course. I think, I hope that that's something that we're going to be able to, be giving licenses, especially to Black entrepreneurs, especially to people who've been most affected by this, really racist war on drugs. And I think we're, fingers crossed, looking good for legalization in this legislative period.
I think it's a good thing. It seems like they're going to try. It's the same bill as last year that they're trying to pass in New York State, right? But it's not going to be attached to the budget the way it was last year. I think that's how they're doing it.
I think so.
I think that's what it's going to be. All right, so you heard it here, Frank. We're going to get into the Green Revolution. We're going to get Paperface, all the boys from Brooklyn, and we're going to get into Green Revolution. We're going to crush it with Eliza Orlins. Go to ElizaOrlins.com. Check out the platform. If you can donate, that'd be great. Add Eliza Orlins on Twitter. She's a great follow. Thank you so much for doing the interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so great to be here. This was so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed that clip, make sure you subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get podcasts. And make sure you follow me at Chris from BKLYN on Twitter. Also, of course, make sure you support our sponsor. That sponsor is Vinylgraph. With Vinylgraph, you can make custom graffiti pieces that are on vinyl stickers that adhere to your wall. They're reusable. You can take them down, use them again. Vinylgraph.com. That's VINYLGRAFF.com. Use the promo code Chris1 at checkout, and they're going to give you a sweet 10% discount. That's Vinylgraph.com. Use the promo code Chris1 for a discount.